So I'm pleased to introduce Ralph Nader to Politics and Prose. Nader was named by The Atlantic as one of the 100 most influential figures in American history, and he continues to be a relentless advocate for grassroots activism and democratic change. His 1965 book, Unsafe at Any Speed, permanently altered the course of a reckless U.S. automobile industry and made Nader a household name. Although he was a household name in Connecticut, because that's where I'm from, and it's cool. One of his greatest achievements was his successful lobbying for a 1974 amendment to the Freedom of Information Act, which gave increased public access to government documents. In To the Ramparts, Nader writes as a Washington, D.C. activist and people's advocate, showing how Trump's crimes and misdemeanors followed the path of no resistance of Obama, Bush, and Clinton regimes, which ushered in the extreme rise of corporate power and the abandonment of the poor and middle classes. Nader brings together the outrages of the Trump administration with the key flaws and failures of these previous administrations that have led to our nation at its current precipice. The New York Times writes, "What sets Ralph Nader apart is that he has moved beyond social criticism to effective political action." Now, please join me in welcoming Ralph Nader.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you all for coming. It's raining. This is good. It's a good sign. There are interesting people in the audience here, and they make a lot of the points that I want to make. But just consider, 30 years ago, who would have dreamed that an independent bookstore would triumph over Borders and Barnes and Noble? Okay? That's part of exemplifying an important principle of our civic culture, which isn't emphasized enough, that our country exhibits the movement from what was implausible to what became reality. When I came to this town, it was impossible to even conceive that the tobacco industry could be held to account. Not just in terms of their seducing youngsters into a lifetime of smoking and death, but in terms of smoking in public places. And when we took on the tobacco industry, first with airlines, buses, and trains, on the grounds that non-smokers have a right not to have smoke blown into their lungs and their kids' lungs, we were called communists. We were called subverters of the American dream, which is to smoke wherever they want, all kinds of names. But we were also told we were pie in the sky, that the grip on Congress is too powerful. All right, so you see what happened. Now, what happened was due to less than 1,000 people. They were public health specialists, very vibrant doctors, especially one in San Francisco. They were some litigators, some tort lawyers, a handful of lawmakers, children's advocates, people who are trying to deal with asthma, never more than 1,000. And they built it up, and stuff spilled out of the internal files of the tobacco companies, got out of 60 Minutes, and people began writing more about it, and that got more smokers to be aggressive. I remember when I was at university, the students who smoked would actually come up to you and blow smoke in your face and say, "What the hell aren't you, why are you smoking?" You walked into a classroom and they were smoking. Walked into an exam and they were smoking. In protest once, I walked into a classroom in my pajamas. Can you imagine how it is now? Imagine a young person today walking into a plane or a bus or a train, and someone pulls out a cigarette or a cigar. I sat next to a guy in a plane, he pulled out his cigar. So you see what the old saying that the blasphemy of today is the triumph of tomorrow. And we don't have enough of that in our minds. We have the lowest expectations of our country that I've ever seen, ever, in my study of history and contemporary life. And you can see how low the expectations are in a society full of solutions on the shelf that aren't applied on the ground by looking at the political system and the corporatist system. and their incredible domination, in spite of efforts to regulate them and break them up and campaign finance, they have never been more powerful, and in insinuated ways that most of us couldn't have predicted with the onset of the internet and what Facebook and Google and others now are doing to, in effect, decide what millions of people read about or see. There's a recent contract that was exposed by Robert Felmuth at University of San Diego Law School between Facebook and preteens. And the preteens would sign the contract and assure Facebook that they had the permission of one parent to have the material they put on Facebook be used in, sent anywhere in Facebook's discretion. Imagine that kind of contractual child molestation would never have been predicted years ago. When I was in law school, we never would have seen what has happened to our freedom of contract, completely destroyed by clicking on or signing on the dotted line, giving up our constitutional rights to go to court, trial by jury, giving the vendor unilateral modification. There's no such thing as a contract. If the airline can modify your frequent flyer stuff at will and say, as long as you're flying the airline, you've agreed, the whole manipulation of consent and the access for wrongful injury and tort law. These corporations are smashing at the fundamentals of freedom in our country. Private law of torts and private law of contracts inherited from England are the fundamental pillars of freedom in our country because we're supposed to be able to use them without asking anyone's permission, no agency or anybody. You negotiate a contract or you go to a lawyer and file against a predator corporation that sold you a hazardous pharmaceutical or a car. So this is very important to keep this in mind before we spin off into the frantic news of the day and sabotage our own expectation levels. And that happens to the most rational and well-read people. They want to know the latest. What will Mueller do? What will Dr. Ford do? And important as those are, nothing is more important than attesting to, I think, what is a truism, that the last chapter of the United States of America will not be written by the oppressors. They will be written by us. They will be written by our withdrawal, our cynicism that masquerades as insight, by our standing as bystanders. The worst script of history is written by informed bystanders who could have done something about it. And so on that score, let me just give you an example. In the front row is Joan Claybrook. Now, Joan's done a lot as head of NHTSA and auto safety, and with a few others. But in one area, without her, it would have not happened. And that is the standard for safe seat belts for children in cars, right? She's a Lone Ranger on that. Sine qua non. Graduate of Goucher. Went to work for Social Security Administration. Then interned under a political science fellowship with a congressman from Georgia who got interested in auto safety. Somewhere here is Bert Four. Where's Bert? Yes, he was with the Federal Trade Commission as an economist lawyer on antitrust, and he started, with my help, the American Institute of Antitrust at a time when it was totally collapsing intellectually, succumbing to the Chicago's monetized mind school of so-called economics. And he built a whole brain trust, advisory brain trust, and began putting out studies and reports, petitions, testimony before Congress. Without Bert, none of this would have happened. There are a lot of people who are economists and lawyers, right? Who are they working for? What are they going to look back on when they're 80? What justice bandwagon did they miss? Like corporate lawyers. Here in our midst is the greatest expert on energy in the United States of America, who is never called by the media. Because the media now interviews each other on things, you know. Judy Woodruff interviews the New York Times writer on energy. But they don't interview someone who has advised several presidents, starting before President Carter, someone who's an engineer, who's a lawyer, who ran the Tennessee Valley Authority, who ran the SMUD utility in San Francisco, who ran the water municipal utility in LA, who advised Governor Brown, who advised Governor Cuomo, the first Governor Cuomo, who is everywhere now showing how we can convert into renewable energy, who started out as a nuclear power advocate until I convinced him otherwise. Now he is the best nuclear power opponent. His name is David Freeman. David, where are you? There he is. See? Now, and he's negotiating the close down of the last nuclear plant in California. Now, with Pacific Gas and Electric. Why are we so pessimistic? Why are we so withdrawn? Why are we so cynically sophisticated? Why have we given up on ourselves? All the wisdom in these shelves, they're ready to be applied. This is nonsense. You have 1 million people who are enlightened and progressive. If each one is a bystander, 1 million people have zero influence. Unfortunately, we haven't developed biological systems where we can connect with one another and one contagious citizen can energize all the rest. We have to do it all by ourselves. And we're not doing it. We're losing the charity race and not focusing on the justice race. And we all know the difference between the two. Charity is important. They have soup kitchens, nice soup kitchens here in the District of Columbia. The question is, why do we need soup kitchens? Where is the justice that prevents the need for charity? You have some of the worst poverty in the country here in the District of Columbia. I just put out a tweet. I don't tweet much, but I do it indirectly. I still use an Underwood typewriter. And the tweet went this way, if I remember it precisely. The Republican politicos are energized by money and greed. The Democrat politicos are compromised by money and greed. Guess who's winning? So this is how they keep us at bay. Don't you know how bad the Republicans are? Yeah, I think so. I mean, I can write a book in 20 minutes on how bad the Republican parties are. They would totally shock Senator Robert Taft and Dwight Eisenhower and Teddy Roosevelt. They are the cruelest, most vicious party in the history of the United States. They have actually voted against issues involving saving kids' lives, giving them adequate health care, protecting them from toxics. They have no shame whatsoever because we don't have a society that knows how to shame them. Instead, they are landsliding the Democrats. Instead of the Democrats landsliding the worst, most anti-worker, consumer, warmongering, Wall Street toady, on and on and on party. A party staffed on Capitol Hill with levels of arrogance and ignorance never wedded together to that degree. These people think that there's no such thing as climate disruption. They think corporations will save the world. They think problems with water pollution, just stop polluting. Doesn't matter. They don't believe in law and order for the rich and powerful. So why aren't the Democrats landsliding them? Because their side is so frantically hypnotized by how bad the Republicans are that they give the Democrats free hand to approximate them. And this is what this book's about. This book shows that Trump did not erupt spontaneously. That all the things that we are appalled about Trump had precursors that erupted in their own way that we accepted. Let's start with the personal thing. His disgusting personal morals. Who was a precursor that survived disgusting personal morals, including rape, and got away with it? Bill Clinton. That never was seen possible. He could ever survive those disclosures, both when in the New Hampshire primary and later on with Ms. Lewinsky. Let's take lawlessness. Right now, as we speak, Trump is droning and bombing anywhere he wants. Special forces went into 140 countries last year. Maybe some with the permission of their dictators, others not. The world is our military killing field. Whatever happened to international law? Trump is lawless. He doesn't obey the Constitution. He doesn't obey federal statutes. He doesn't recognize international treaties. Guess who taught him? Prior presidents. A constitutional lecturer at the University of Chicago Law School extended the lawlessness abroad of George W. Bush. He didn't invade and blow apart Iraq, but he expanded drone warfare. He expanded assassination. He became the designated Tuesday morning homicide orderer. Imagine sitting in the White House with his advisors and they say, here's Abdu this and Muhammad that and Butrus this. And you know, they don't like America. You know, it's like this and this. It's New York Times report, page 1. They got a prize for it. Trump doesn't have the intensity to do that. But the idea of our president being prosecutor, judge, jury, executioner, and cover-upper precedes Donald Trump. It precedes Obama. It precedes Bush. It precedes Clinton. But they all expanded it. So now we're numb to it. We're numb to it. It doesn't even make the headlines anymore. Some would say, well, you know, that's the bitter fruits of empire. Well, let's bring it back home. Our adversaries came out of countries that we carved up with the British and French and installed dictators and backed them to the hilt diplomatically, militarily, and politically. And they happened to abuse their own people, and their own people began to wonder who's behind the abusers. And then when 9/11 occurred, we were surprised. Why were we surprised? What would we have done if the shoe was on the other foot? And instead of reacting multilaterally to bring the perpetrators to justice, we blew apart Afghanistan and then Iraq, and now it's spilled into 20 countries. And Hillary's war overthrowing Gaddafi, who is cutting deals and behaving himself and disarming, going to the White House and getting Obama to order the overthrow with planes and all the rest of it, against the position of Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, who said to both of them, do you realize what happens when you overthrow a dictator in a tribal society? I didn't care. And now you got a half a dozen countries in chaos in that area. Libya, Mali, so on. So all this is basically to get us to the level where we say the Constitution puts a burden on us. It starts with we the people. It doesn't start with we the Congress. It doesn't start with we the corporation. It doesn't start with we the Pentagon. It starts with we the people. And that burden means that we pull back on our sovereign power. which we have wildly delegated to our government, which in turn has assigned it to the corporatists. And so we have now a maturing corporate state where the ties between business and government are like this. This today in the Washington Post. How about this one? 90% of the people in this country are upset with airline fees. It's like you get hit with a fee for everything but breathing or going to the restroom. So what does the Congress do? They recognize that the leading complaint by people about the airlines conveyed to Congress are airline fees, except for Southwest, which doesn't have these $200 reservation fee changes and other imposed penalties, which you are, by the way, told you agreed to in the fine print contract. Well, the word last week was the section in the FAA authorization bill was going to give the Department of Transportation modest regulatory power against inappropriate fees or unreasonable fees. And the opinion was overwhelmingly for it. Well, they dropped it on Friday. They cut the section out. I sent a survey to all members of Congress earlier this year listing all the freebies the airlines give, guess what? The members of Congress. Not us. They have all kinds of freebies, all kinds of privileges, all kinds of exemptions from how they treat normal passengers. And we sent one to every one of the 535 people, including our friends. Not one responded. We sent it again. Not one responded. It was written up in the Washington Post. Not one responded. Why? Because that's the reason, not just the campaign contributions. That's the reason that they haven't passed airline passenger rights in years. Now, this is not one of the most serious problems in the world, but it illustrates the total arrogance of this Congress collectively. I always say to people when they say, what can we do? I say, it starts with Congress. That's your tool. The smallest, most powerful branch of government. The branch that can be a trim tab for the executive and judiciary. That's the way the framers set it up. The other two branches do not have the appropriation power. They don't have their tax power. They don't have the confirmation power. They don't have the investigative power that Congress can have in terms of quickly and openly, to mention some of its leverage. And there are 535 of them. We know their names. We can know their names. They want our votes more than they want money from special commercial interests. Why aren't we controlling them? What would it take to control them? History shows some of the things we've done and some of the things you've done in the audience. Tell me any major change in justice in the United States of America apart from the Civil War. Any major change, women's suffrage, abolition of slavery, farmer, populist, progressive reform, labor unions, Medicare, Social Security, you name it, that ever took more than 1% of active citizens involved, mobilizing for the reform. Sometimes 300 people, as long as they have public opinion behind them. If they have public opinion behind them, and they're organized in congressional districts, and now they can weave together much more insistently with the internet, the press, reluctant as it is to cover the civil community and the civil society, will cover what they do because they're getting signals of real power out there. They will cover power. But it's not happening. And why isn't it happening? Well, if you take the population at large and you start deleting millions of people who are not able to link together Congress watchdog clubs 3 to 500 hours a year, open up a couple offices full-time in each congressional district. You'll have a lot of millions of people who just can't do that because they're ill, they're obligated, family, they're terribly impoverished, etc. Millions of people. But you don't need more than 1%. And the nice thing about that 1% is that on major transformational changes in this country, you have liberal-conservative convergence. On living wages, never mind what the think tanks are trying to divide and rule. Never mind the ruling groups who for 2,000 years have developed a strategy of divide and rule. And it's amazing how people fall for it. And there are things that are divisive, obviously, without having to be sandpapered. There's reproductive rights, there's immigration now, there's prayer in schools, the usual traditional ones. But look at living wage, look at full health care, look at cracking down on corporate abuse and corporate crime and corporate monopoly. Look at a decent, fair tax system. Look at the accountability desires of people in positions in power. Comes in 70, 80, 90%, even without an organized move to advance it in the media. Breaking up the big banks comes in at 90%. They know what's going to happen next, another crash and another bailout, and it won't be just the big banks crashing. So you have this convergence where people live, work, and raise their family. The ideological schisms are nowhere near as prominent as we see them on Fox News or NPR. Because empirically, they have to respond to reality. They want health care. They want clean air. They want clean water. They want decent streets. They want public services. They want fair play, regardless of whether they're red state or blue state or conservative or liberal. It's the citizen movement that overcomes the divide and rule tactics and strategies. But to do that, we've got to move from sociology to psychology, because psychology makes us ask important questions of ourselves. Do we know what we would like to have done in this country and world of ours? This temporary stay we're given? I'm sure we do. There's a fundamental strain of fair play in the vast majority of people all over the world. Do we have the time to do anything about it? We make time. Do we have knowledge of other people who share our views that we can connect with arm in arm? Yeah, once we get over the small talk and the text messaging. Do we have the self-respect to put all these in motion? That's what it's all about. Self-respect about the plight of humanity and the natural world and posterity. Self-respect that breaks up our daily routine, tyrannical as it is for all of us. Self-respect to show up and stand tall. How many of you have begged your friends who agree with you just to come to a meeting, come to a march, come to a demonstration, come to a city council, come to, a courthouse? Don't have time, have other commitments. If we don't have time for democracy, we don't have time for ourselves in a most fundamental sense. So I want to end on the statehood issue. There aren't 500 people in this entire city who spend more than 10 or 20 hours a year trying to get statehood, trying to get self-government. If you took a poll, it comes in at 72%. Where's the gap? We had an entire afternoon on statehood at Constitution Hall, pretty symbolic building for that purpose, in September of 2016, along with 8 days of civic mobilization. It was the greatest combination of civic leaders and civic thinkers and doers on more issues and reforms ever brought together in American history. And it was blacked out by the press. It was all about Trump those days, all about fantasies, all about trivia, all about entertainment. They had no time for people who, over 50 years in that hall, changed the course of American history. The teachers had no time to bring them out of the law schools and put them in the chairs. They had no time. The mayor of D.C. had no time to go down Pennsylvania Avenue or Constitution Avenue and open 4 hours of experts and mobilizers on D.C. statehood. Although a couple previous mayors showed up and city council person and so on. We plastered the entire northwest part of the district and Capitol Hill and other parts with thousands of posters and put out press releases. And public radio was not interested, local public radio. They weren't interested. And so in that hall were about 250 people out of 3,500 seats. And it was free. There was a nominal charge, but anybody who couldn't pay was free. So here's a jurisdiction, the only national jurisdiction in the world where votes are permitted, where the people cannot vote for their members of Congress. And they don't care. And part of it is, what's the difference? This is a badly governed, it'll always be badly governed. The politicians, the corporate interests, the developers, what's the difference? How easily we escape from facing ourselves in the mirror. And suddenly our culture has become one where you're not supposed to harangue your fellow citizen. Why are you a scold, Ralph? Why do you scold people? Because I hear from people about their grievances, about the loss of their loved ones to preventable practices. Because I listened to Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine that told us in a peer-reviewed study, backed by other previous studies, that 5,000 people die every week due to preventable problems in hospitals, not counting clinics and doctors' offices. And these are physicians. And that was their lowest estimate. And those are real people, aren't they? They're not just statistics. 250,000 a year, the third leading cause of death in America. Because I listen to these people. And there's nothing special about me. There's nothing special about me. You say, oh, you can do it, Ralph. You can do it, Joan. You can do it, Bert. You can do it, David. You're special. There's nothing special about us except the thirst for justice as the reason for being. That's what's special about us. We want to project our conscience, something that's not denied anybody in our country. It's available. It's free. There's no ticket to admission to engage in a vibrant, productive democracy. Now, let me just end on this note. We published in the 70s the best-selling book on Congress ever written. It was on the Donahue Show. It was all over and came out in paperback, several editions. I went to a publisher a couple of years ago and I said, how about an update? This is a major publisher. He said, are you kidding? Nobody will buy a book on Congress. I said, what's happened? He said, it's information overload. You know, they can get anything on the internet. Or they're just not interested. That's our survey data. I went to other publishers, not interested. Now, there are books written on Congress, but a lot of them are a little biographical. Some of them are narrow, some of them are technical. But this should be a raging bestseller on Congress. So, what was my default position? I decided to write a fable called How the Rats Reformed the Congress. And it's a very realistic book once you get over the opening pages and the jolt of the rats coming up from the catacombs beneath Congress and into the plumbing. This is what I'm reduced to. Now, I must say, it is a very motivating book. It'll be out in a couple weeks. But I couldn't get a publisher for it. People aren't interested. I always believe that if something is important, it can be made interesting. That's what the best journalists do. That's what the best writers do. That's what the best speakers do. This, by the way, How the Rats Reformed Congress. And if anybody thinks it's trivial and frivolous, this is the indictment. This is the realistic indictment. It is so bad now, you can't reach people in Congress. You can't reach their staff. They have voicemail, often hours at a time, during daytime business. Rand Paul locks his office in a heavily guarded Senate office building. You have to do the cell phone to get into a senator's office suite. They don't have public hearings on the tax law. They wanted to smash the tort system. They had no public hearings. They got 5 bills through the House of Representatives. They have no public hearings on major issues. This is unheard of degradation. When you call, the people look and see whether you're a campaign contributor so you can get through to an intern. How are we going to stand for this? They're using our power and turning it against us, our delegated sovereign power, and turning it against us. So I hope that you'll go out and start the conversation in a very fundamental, look in the mirror way. Everything starts with a conversation. Every justice movement starts with a conversation between 2 people, 4, 10. We've shown that in our own history. And we've also shown, but we don't learn, that it's a lot easier than we think. I had a little book that we had a signing here called Breaking Through Power. It's easier than we think. I give all kinds of examples, not just 10 years ago, 20 years ago, throughout our history. Less than 1%. Isn't that an optimistic recognition of historical experience? To know that it takes so few good people representing majority opinion? Anybody here from Epic? Mark? Is Mark here? There's a little group down on Connecticut Avenue. That's the main bulwark to try to salvage what privacy is left in an internet age. I went there a few months ago. They're just like 8 or 9, 10 people. And they're shaking the foundations. And you'll hear more from them with their litigation and their petitions and their reports and their reading the fine print of Google and Facebook. It's easier than we think. That is the best conversation starter when you talk to people who don't think anything can be done. Que sera, sera. Whatever will be, will be. Just say, don't you know it's easier than you think? And you get it moving. So, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, we have questions now.
Yes.
Sorry.
Two-part questions. You brought out the fact that the psychology is important in this thing. Well, you know, your friend Freud learned that he couldn't do psychology unless he used Socratic method to get people's ideas out first. Okay, you know from law school, that's how law school is taught. Okay, so you have masses and you want them to work together. But how do you listen to them first and integrate their ideas? And that's a very difficult task. How would you do it? You can't just say, hey, I have this great idea. People all have their own view of what has to be done. And
that's why you go down what semanticists say, the abstraction ladder. People are manipulated and enraged against one another with use of abstractions, images, racial, whatever. You go down to where they live, work, and raise their families. I mean, I've been in the Deep South and gotten standing ovations for saying the same thing I say in Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. Why? Well, because, you know, conservatives don't go working for Walmart and say, I'm a conservative. I don't want a minimum wage that gives me the wherewithal to support my family, right? So you can see where this conservative worker may vote for Trump, but it dissipates. Mm-hmm. So that's one way you communicate. Mm-hmm. Another way you communicate is the high points of our own history, the best practices. You go down south, and you know the populist progressive movement started in mm-hmm. East Texas. Mm-hmm. In a couple hundred counties, they signed up hundreds of farmers door to door and $1 dues, which is like $50 today, and then swept across the country. So you're in Indiana, you talk about Eugene Debs, see? So best practices is another way. A third is care for your children and grandchildren. That is, you may not care about yourself, but what about your children and your grandchildren? Margaret Mead said that was one way to get parents to wear seatbelts and get their kids to wear seatbelts, because that projection forward brings out the best in them if they've given up, you know, on themselves in various ways. So that's, I'll tell you, I can't, even though I say it's easier than we think, and it is, the depth of surrender in this country is totally staggering. And part of it is because people are kept so busy with anxiety, fear, dread, 2 low-paid jobs, $1,000 a month daycare, huge commutes, having to take care of ailing parents and grandparents. I mean, you say, who has time, right? But you go into New England, where you have the town meeting form of government, and you have small towns, and there is no barrier whatsoever mm-hmm. for you to be part of the local legislature, because that's what a town meeting is, if it doesn't go to referendum, right? So there's no transportation problem. There's no voter suppression problem, right? Mm-hmm. There's mm-hmm. nothing. And they're dying mm-hmm. because people don't show up. Mm-hmm. So there you are, the probably classic democratic institution in the world, mm-hmm. handed to people. Mm-hmm. And they can't be bothered to walk 4 or 5 blocks or across the street mm-hmm. to the local school auditorium mm-hmm. to participate. Well, naturally, the ones that do are often the shouters. And the shouters can be very abusive. Just mm-hmm. 5, 6 of them can jam up a town meeting. Mm-hmm. And that turns away the others. Right. Well, they're looking for excuses. What do you mean turns away the others? The 4 excuses we get for people not being active citizens: they don't have the time, they don't have the knowledge. Even if they had the time and the knowledge, they don't want to be slandered in public and abused. And even if they had the time and knowledge and they had asbestos skin, it won't matter, because the big boys will decide whatever they decide. So there you are, the escape rationale. It's total nonsense. You talk to them, you think your taxes are being used right? No. You think the damn potholes are being? No. Do you think the lake is polluted? Yes. Do you think the politicians aren't listening to you? They're not listening. Well, what do you mean you don't have the time? You think your property taxes are discriminatory? Do you think that they're not cracking down on the health insurance industry? It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. So it does take, every neighborhood has influential people who are civically active. Right. That's the core touch. That's where you want to get to, because they already are believable, right, and they're known. So you're not seen as an outsider. If we had 1,000 full-time lecturers in this country to get full Medicare for all, single payer, whatever, free choice of doctor, much more efficient, on and on. If they spoke to 1,000 people a week, well advanced, clubs, gatherings, small groups here and there, but let's say 1,000 fan out around the country, and they have good conversations with a total of 1,000 people each a week. That's 1 million people a week. That's 50 million people a year. What mega billionaire couldn't fund that, who's enlightened? You see, we never think of that, right? Oh, God, how do you reach people? You reach people in small groups, small communities. They're always gathering in every town for all kinds of ways. Yes.
First, I should say, when I started law school in 1969, my paper that you had to write for legal writing was based on your stuff.
Did you flunk?
No, I did quite well. What can we do about the Supreme Court, with or without Kavanagh? The court that we studied back in the day was the Warren Court, and it looked like we were just going to keep making progress, and things turned around abruptly, and it's gone right ever since, and now we're back to Lochner.
Well, first of all, any of you read this book, Democracy in Chains, by McLean, professor at Duke? Mm-hmm. It's here. You have it here. It outlines how much more energy and savvy the corporate right wing has than our side.
Right.
It's just unbelievable. They just decided that they're going to take over the 3 branches of government.
Exactly.
And they did it with, a so-called brain trust like James Buchanan and George Mason and others. They did it with these think tanks.
Yep.
And they did it with money. And they did it tactically to advance gerrymandering by switching 500 state legislative seats in various states to get the gerrymandering thing in 2010.
Yep.
And she outlines it all. She actually got into the archives. And
the Heritage Foundation, the Federalist Society, all of that.
All right, well, where's our side, right? I mean, for every Koch brother, you have George Soros. For every think tank, where's our side? We have the polls. Our issues have the polls on our side. And they perpetrated a not-so-silent coup d'etat and got the majority state legislatures, governors, and here are the 3 branches. Maybe it'll change a bit in November, but how long do we wait, right? Now, the Supreme Court, that was due to the Democrats winning elections and losing the Electoral College. So why aren't they trying to abolish the Electoral College? That's already on the way to being abolished by a citizen group. Do you know about National Vote Power, is it called? It's just 7 people hired by Steve Silberstein, who's a retired computer executive. In San Francisco, he's already gotten enough state legislatures to reach 172 electoral votes. You go to 270 and it's over. Basically, California, New York, and others have passed laws saying if 270, if enough states pass laws that represent 270 vote electoral college, we'll give our electoral college vote to whoever wins the national vote. So that whoever wins the national vote wins the electoral college vote. Think of the devastation on that,
But those are lifetime appointments. And the people they choose are young.
Yes. So how do you change it? Well, it's going to take pretty dramatic provocation, which seems to be on its way, to develop an impeachment process. So it isn't a big deal. See, I think judges that systemically subvert the sovereign power of the people to the domination of corporate power. See, they're basically supporting an artificial entity here,
Right.
again and again, over real people.
Right.
And it's going to get worse with artificial intelligence and the internet and so on. That is, to me, a grounds for impeachment. Because what they're doing basically is subverting the rights of real human beings to the supremacy of commercial corporations. In all ways, civil rights, civil liberties, on and on and on. I mean, they're seizing the civil rights that were used for
Right.
real people, and the 14th Amendment, all that. Now, if that becomes a persistent pattern, and it affects health, safety, war, peace, civil rights, civil liberties, we have got to seriously take this case to the Congress. Some people have said 15-year terms. You know, I mean, there are long-range differences here. But, you know, it does come down to who wins the Electoral College, which is really, I always, when I write Donald Trump, I refer to him as our selected president. He doesn't like that. You see, he didn't win the popular vote. Kerry almost did it in reverse. If 60,000 votes shifted in Iowa, he would have won the Electoral College, even though George W. Bush won the popular vote in 2004. So that's why they're not interested, because, you know, they're in Ohio. Yeah, that's why they're not interested, because, you know, it's sort of like a roulette game here. You know, it can favor you one way or the other. And this has happened 5 times in American history, where the candidate who got the second votes, most number of votes, won the presidency. We're in a country, we're in the world, there's something like this happening. And it is not a high-profile issue.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Hi. What, if anything, have you changed your mind about?
Are you sure you want to say if anything? Huh?
Yeah. What
garlic.
What if anything? Garlic. That was the answer I was
You
expecting.
want to be a little more specific?
I want to know if you've changed your mind on anything politically related in your life.
Oh, yeah. Believe it or not, I started out as a libertarian. I started out, you know, I didn't like government regulation. And then I faced reality as I connected with more and more problems at grassroots America.
Can I just ask about how old were you when you say you changed from libertarian to?
It was a gradual process in the early 20s.
Interesting.
Like I didn't like public housing because it disadvantaged landlords unfairly, taxpayer. And then I saw the slums, and I saw what landlords did. Changed my mind.
Thank you.
I can give you more examples, but we can go. Yes.
I attended your Callaway Whistleblower Awards ceremony on Thursday. I also attended the Whistleblower Summit in July. At these events, at the July event, there was this big congressional luncheon with Chuck Grassley and all these politicians that praised whistleblowers. They came from all over the country to state their grievances. And then discussion stopped. All the lip service stopped. Whistleblowers continued to whistleblow. They continued to get retaliated against. Nothing is done. There's no traction in Congress. How can we transform the whistleblower event from a one-day wonder into a year-round problem that people gravitate toward and give real traction to?
Well, actually, you touched on something where there's been real progress. We had the first conference on whistleblowers ever in the early 70s here in Washington. People whistleblowing on Pentagon contracts, people whistleblowing on corporations, labor unions, and so on. And at that time, there were no protections. The word whistleblower meant you were a snitch. It had no dignity to the word. And so gradually, because we had some laws passed, one of them signed by George Herbert Walker Bush and others, you had a merit protection board. And I know there's a lot of problems with that, but at least it recognizes the right of bringing your conscience to work, kind of like a civilian Nuremberg right. It recognized that. Then there was groups like GAP, GAP, Government Accountability Group. That's a citizen group that provided very good legal representation to, for example, meat and poultry inspectors who blew the whistle working for the Department of Agriculture and were told to shut up and let dirty chickens go to market. So then you had litigation. Then you had certain provisions and laws in the early water pollution law that we helped pass in the early 70s. You had a right against being retaliated against if you reported a company was violating a water permit, for example. If they retaliated against you, you had a cause of action. The states began following. And by the way, this thing is now a worldwide phenomenon. Professor Robert Vaughn, who just retired from American University Law School, wrote a book on all the whistleblower laws in over 100 countries. So you can see it is building in the right direction with a lot more to be done. We need in every county in our country a award ceremony for whistleblowers to give them support because they go through hell. You often see my sister Claire gives the Callaway Award for Moral Courage every year, and she gave a couple of days ago to Sandra Black, who blew the whistle on the Savannah River Nuclear Storage Company. They fired her because she told the truth about the cover-ups and then was reinstated, but she went through hell. The other guy blew the whistle on a Japanese medical equipment company that was selling in this country, and they were shutting people up, and he spoke out, and he really went through hell. You don't really get the sense until you can talk to them what they go through. For example, when he was fired, all his friends said, "Why is John not working?" He was vice president of this company. Did he commit a crime or something? See, it took like years, 4 or 5 years before he got his award. They both got awards and reinstated. So, yeah, there's, best answer to your question is to call up Professor Vaughn. He's on top of it.
These are good success stories, but I think from what I've heard, the overwhelming majority of whistleblowers still get retaliated against.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
Even Sandra Black, those people that conspired to fire her, they were still all in their jobs.
I'm just saying the momentum is in the right direction, and everybody's got to build on it. Everybody needs to build on it.
Do you have any suggestions how this could be built into a sustainable?
Well, the best way is more GAPs, more government accountability groups at the regional and state level, because they provide real firepower. They connect with the media, and they provide pro bono representation. They go into court, and they subpoena documents. Just look that up, and you'll see what I mean. We just need regional ones. Where are all these enlightened billionaires? They can change the country, Don't they get sick of 5-course meals every night?
We'll take this last question.
You have lived through numerous administrations, and also you have run for president of the Green Party, and I voted for you. What I'd like to know is, how does the Trump administration compare to the previous administrations that you have lived through? What kind of impact has it made on your mind?
Well, it's obviously the worst, except for they haven't gotten us into a big war yet. But they have systemically not enforced statutory requirements in the consumer, labor, and environment and other areas. Now, you would think there'd be a remedy for that. This isn't prosecutorial discretion, where you got a lot of polluters and you don't have enough prosecutors, so you pick some worse polluters and the others, you're not enforcing the law. This is Pruitt and Mulvaney and all these guys brazenly saying they are not going to, they're shutting down the enforcement arm. They're taking the federal cop off the corporate crime beat. And there is no ready remedy for us as citizens other than using the Administrative Procedures Act, which is prolonged and it just affects the agency, to petition directly and get them out of office, to say, you took an oath of office to enforce the laws of this agency. You said so to Congress under oath in your confirmation process. You're doing exactly the opposite, systematically, brazenly, openly, defiantly. You should be expelled from your job. And there's no ready remedy for that in terms of a private citizen action.
You must have cried, literally cried, when the Consumer Protection Agency was dismantled under Mulvaney.
Well, yeah, I don't cry, I bellow. But I mean, it is true. I mean, Mulvaney came over part-time from the Office of Management and Budget. He's the worst of the worst, by the way. A lawyer from South Carolina who was a member of Congress. Hated deficits and cut the IRS budget to the bone so they couldn't collect any of $400 billion. There's no probity there. And he basically said, we're going to shut it down. One of the functions is the promotion of Wall Street. Promotion of Wall Street was established to bring Wall Street to bay, to prosecute the Wall Street crimes. That's how brazen they are, right? Now, do you think they'd get away with this if we really had an opposing party worthy of the name? Going back? I mean, Senator Robert Taft would demand investigative hearings, Mr. Conservative, in the 1950s. It's just, the Democrats don't have the energy. The Tea Party people in the Congress, I've often said, give me 4 of these guys, and they'll roll the entire Progressive Caucus.
It's because they have donors, too.
Yeah, they have their own sinecures. I was just told by a high official of the AFL-CIO, it's good I was sitting down. I was on the phone, and I said, how can they not do this, and how can they not do that? There are millions, 125 million non-voters coming up in November. 125 million. All they need is 10 million of them to move from non-voters to voters. And that's a matter of 10 weeks knocking on doors, neighborhood meetings, and so on. How could they not do this? And they could landslide the Republicans. He lowers his voice. This guy's a total loyalist. He said, Ralph, they don't really want to win. I said, what? He said, they want to win their own seats, but they don't want to really win the election over the Republicans and take power. I mean, this is a guy that goes to all kinds of meetings. There is this idea that they think there's catastrophe ahead and they don't want to be held responsible for it. And when you see how they contend, I listen to the radio C-SPAN debates of members of Congress running against each other over the years. It takes me sometimes 15 minutes to figure out who's a Republican, who's a Democrat. And then this, I just did this thing. How many of you know Lapham's Quarterly? That's a great journal. Every 3 months it has one theme, like rule of law, greed, gambling, love, money, war, so on. It goes through all history. It's wonderful stuff. I just wrote an article for him, which I passed out to all the first-year law students at Harvard a couple weeks ago. Put it right on their desk. And it's called Land of the Lawless. Lawlessness is the norm in our country for the rich and powerful. It is the norm. And the law schools refuse to recognize that corporations are violating the law. And if they get caught 1% of the time, it's too much for them. Whether it's pollution laws or consumer laws or payday loan rackets or landlord building codes, or they do it generically by rigging private contracts, fine print, or by keeping you from conflict resolution, or by getting the government to regulate us instead of them under the guise of deregulation, which is a way of shifting the government regulatory party to the corporate regulatory party. So anyway, if you want to get it, it's at hlrecord.org. You get the whole thing. This is the most comprehensive, concise documentation of arguably one of the biggest issues confronting us ever, which is the destruction of the rule of law when it comes to the powerful. And Harvard Law Record is hlrecord.org. They reprinted it. And so how many people you think polled want rigorous enforcement of regulatory laws? Between 85 and 90% of the people. Again and again. But the Democrat Party does not represent that opinion, you see? This business of left, right, conservative, red, this is just manipulation. Apart from, maybe a half a dozen really like reproductive rights. It's manipulation, and very effective manipulation. Why are we fooled and flummoxed so easily? Why are we fooled and flummoxed so easily? When I was campaigning, I would say to people, have you ever seen a politician who doesn't flatter the people? And they sort of laugh. And I said, well, tell me, if you have, I'll show you a visiting Martian. It's manipulation. Fooled, flummoxed, flattered. They're very good at it. And we've got to cut right through there. Luckily, I had a lucky choice of parents, because when my father would receive politicians in a restaurant, they had a long counter. And the politician would come and say, hi, I'm so-and-so running for, hi, I'm so-and-so, hi, I'm so-and-so, hi. And my father would be at the coffee urn, and he'd be the last hand shook. And my father wouldn't let him go. And, he said, hi, Mr. I want to talk with you. I don't want to just shake your hand. Come on, sit down, have a cup of coffee, see what you stand for. We're so easily flattered. Reagan was a fantastic flatterer. So
He's the great communicator.
yeah, well, what does he communicate? We have to beware of cruel men with smiles. Cruel men with smiles. If anyone else has a pressing question, because we're going to have signed books. By the way, the best gift you can give a youngster today is a book, an actual print book. And you can show show them how to open it. Okay? And show that you're respecting their intelligence by giving them a print book. So I hope that you'll buy the book for yourself, and you'll give it as a gift, also a gift to a local library branch, because all over the country their budgets are hurting. This book, by the way, I've written like 10 books that are never reviewed in the Washington Post, New York Times. Never. So you have to get it. You can't learn about it.
All right. So
Yes, we should have civic skill seminars all over the country, including your whistleblower rights. Just like H&R Block has storefronts, we should have them all over the country. How to be a skilled citizen.
All right. If you want a copy of Ralph Nader's To the Ramparts, we have them available at our register.